All right. Well, let's continue the series that we started off last week. If you would, we've called this series "Accepted." If you weren't able to be here last week, or if you didn't catch that message, you can always catch up on our YouTube channel. So I'd encourage you to go back. Last week was an introduction to the series, and so you can catch up there. But what I want to do this week is I want to begin to develop the ideas of this series. And one of the things that we're going to look at today is, what does acceptance look like? We want to get a really clear and practical picture of what it looks like, especially for us as kingdom people or as Jesus followers. We want to follow the example of Jesus in the way that we practice love and acceptance. So that's what we're going to explore this morning. If you have a Bible or a Bible device, you can go to John 4. I'll have the main text on the screen, but I may read some extra. You never know. Um, for some of you, this is a familiar story. Jesus has been traveling, and I appreciate that Jesus's humanity is shown in this story, because it talks about, basically, Jesus got tired and thirsty. And so he ends up at a well, but he doesn't have a bucket to draw water, but he's just sort of stopping there to rest. And where we're going to pick up here in John 4, he meets a woman. John chapter 4, I'm picking up about halfway through verse 6, where it says, Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well at noontime. I just want to give you permission. You've mentioned something like, if you felt weary this week, you're still following Jesus' example, okay? It's okay. He sat wearily beside the well about noontime, and soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food, and the woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans, right? So you understand, Jesus and this woman these are not groups that normally mix in social settings or otherwise. She says to Jesus, "You are a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Jesus replies, "If you only knew the gift that God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me and I would give you living water." Now, Jesus goes on to have this interaction because this woman doesn't just immediately grasp, as many of us, if we were in that situation, probably wouldn't either. She doesn't immediately grasp what Jesus is saying. And as you go on in the story, she begins to start to pick up the clues, and well, maybe he's talking about the Messiah. And in the course of the conversation, Jesus says, "I am the Messiah, like the person that you're looking for. I'm him. I'm the dude." And what we see here, because Jesus, now again, I'm not going to take time to do the whole story, but if you're familiar, or if you want to read this later, you can read the rest of the chapter. Basically, Jesus, what we now would call, gives a word of knowledge. And he basically says, he tells her things about her life. No, you don't have a husband, and you've had multiple husbands in the past. He sort of reveals, or as I like to say, he reads her mail. Like, he knows things that, other than by the Spirit of God, he couldn't have known. He did not have a relationship with this woman. He did not even live in the same town. Like, there's no other natural explanation for Jesus to know this information. But it's revealed to him by the Spirit, and he says it. Now, it's important that you understand. Jesus doesn't reveal or say these things to condemn the woman. He says it to help her open the door to him, to what he's wanting to give her. And Jesus is practicing, in the fact that he's even having the conversation with this woman, acceptance. Jesus is opening his arms to her and accepting her, and not saying, "I would like you to go back home and get your life in order." And, no, he doesn't give her a list of things to do. He accepts her where she's at. If any of you who have picked up, or maybe we handed you a copy of the book, this next little bit is comes from that material, and so we're going to look at the practical and the biblical side by side today. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give you this list of things that, based on the book, The Power of the Blessing, Gary Smalley proposes that these are things uh, that are practices of acceptance. And then we're going to follow that up. And as you know, I won't have time to develop all of them, but we're going to look briefly or reference 5 different stories where we see Jesus practicing all of these things. So I hope this is going to be super practical, but let's just hit the highlights here real quick. Acceptance is practiced by, first off, appropriate, meaningful touch. Now, I don't have to build a big case for that. You get that. You get a hug from a family member. You get a side hug from a bro. You get a gentle tap on the shoulder. Like, there's all sorts of ways that we can communicate love and acceptance to each other through appropriate, meaningful touch that communicates acceptance. Like, that's part of what we're communicating. Because let's just be real extreme. Somebody walks in the back door of the room, and it's like, now I know I'm exaggerating for a point here, but it's like, it happens to be the one person in the whole world that you despise the most. You're probably not going to run down this aisle and go give them a big hug. You're like, we don't tend to have appropriate, meaningful touch towards people that we're not accepting of. All right, so I'm not gonna. I don't want to spend too much. I'm saying this to myself. The second is through spoken words, the way that we choose to talk to people. Now, my kids get in. I don't want to say that. My kids do this, but they also call me out on it. Okay, we talk about it's not just what you say; it's how you say it. Right? So we want to say encouraging things, we want to say positive things, but we also want to speak words or communicate in ways that communicate acceptance. I accept you as a person. Now, we're going to talk a little bit later about some caveats to that, but for now, let's finish this list. The third is attaching high value, or we could say expressing high value. Now, all of these can work together, right? They're not mutually exclusive, they're not isolated. But if I attach high value to you as a person, that's going to be reflected in the way that I relate to you, the amount of time that I might give you. There's all sorts of ways that I can express that I place or attach a high value to you. Uh, Most of you know Jesus operated in his life with what I like to call concentric circles of associates and relationships. He had the 3 that were the closest. He had the disciples, and then he had, I don't know, you could call it maybe the congregation. It's like, and we're all like that. We have our innermost circle of people. We have maybe our close friends and family, and then we have acquaintances and strangers, and you can keep going. But one of the ways that we communicate that is by placing value on people. The fourth thing is picturing. Now, I know, again, okay, now we're using a word that's normally a noun as a verb. Picturing a hope-filled future, or picturing a life with meaning. Now, this might be a little bit harder to grasp because, well, how do I do that other than saying kind words or like the other things that we've talked about? But part of this is seeing people in the direction of the future that God has for them, rather than seeing people and judging them based on past behaviors and mistakes. This has to do with mercy over judgment. This has to do with seeing what God sees instead of just basing it on what we see at the surface level. Now, I'm not talking about ignoring someone. If someone has stolen from you, I'm not saying you should, maybe trust them immediately or hand them your most valuable possessions, but we shouldn't judge that person or base our value of them as a person based on what they've done. We can picture a hope-filled future because the reality is we were all in need of that hope at one point or another and probably continue to be in need of Jesus's hope. Then the last thing is active, genuine commitment. It sort of speaks for itself, but if I'm accepting of someone, if I'm placing high value on them, if I'm building a solid relationship, I'm going to express commitment. Marriage is a great example, although it's not the only one this can apply to any relationship. But, when Brittany and I got married, we uh, formalized and expressed a significant, active, and genuine commitment to each other in a relationship called marriage. That, like, we meant the things that we said, we meant it for a long time. It's a significant thing. And that's one of the ways, so that might be extreme, but that's one of the ways we communicate acceptance. Okay. Mid-message lecture over. Let's go back to the Bible and begin to show how this applies in Jesus's example so we can get a hold of some practical ways we can do these things, right? Because I don't think me just listing them for you really changes anything. But as we see Jesus' example and as we follow him, he can actually make a difference. The first, excuse me, and I'm not going to read any of these scriptures just because there's a lot of them, but I'm going to put the reference up on the screen. So if you want to jot it down and go read the story later, you can do that. The first is John 13, 12 to 15. This is the story when Jesus washes the disciples' feet. Now, there's all different things I could have used. This illustrates how Jesus used meaningful touch to communicate acceptance. Now, there's more to it than just acceptance, but again, you have to think in terms of the cultural moment that the disciples lived. The culture would have said that the guy in charge, it's sort of beneath him to wash feet, right? Like that's a servant thing. And Jesus showed us that one way of accepting people is that even though Jesus had the ultimate authority, he chose to go low, to choose a humble position, and to wash their feet, not only as a means of communicating humility, but acceptance. I accept you, and I have a place for you in my kingdom. Jesus is communicating that to his disciples. The second one is in Luke 8. This is Jesus has an interaction with the woman who has a flow of blood or an issue of blood. And I encourage you to read that there in Luke 8. It's a great story. But Jesus uses his spoken words and he speaks identity, he speaks affirmation, he speaks blessing. Now we'll touch on this some more as we go through the series, but one of the basic premises of the book is that acceptance really is the true blessing. Like when we hear the word blessing, what pops into your mind? It's okay, you can tell me. I know I didn't prepare you for interactive, but somebody real quick, what pops into your head when you hear the word blessing? Just be honest. Stuff. Fair? Stuff, right? Like I got more stuff. I'm blessed. What else? Your husband. Okay, that's good. Anybody else? First thing it pops in. Yeah. Oh, okay. You were trying to get me health. Sure. All good things. All things that we want in some degree or another, right? The truest blessing is to know that no matter where I'm at, no matter what I've done, no matter what is included in my past or my present, that Jesus has said, I accept you. Because it's not, I know I'm repeating the old lines, but it's like not something we could earn. We didn't earn a place in Jesus's kingdom. We didn't merit a place in relationship with him. We just didn't measure up. But Jesus says, I accept you. As a parent, as a father, Jesus says, I accept you. Now, I know in this room, we have a mixed bag, probably all over the spectrum of child-parent relationships. Some of you had the best parent or parents in the world. Some of you maybe don't know your parents. Some of you maybe had the most difficult and contentious relationship. We need to be careful to not take our earthly relationships and place that picture on God, but we need to let that happen in reverse. We need to just admit sometimes our earthly relationships don't reflect the acceptance that Jesus shows us. But we can look to Jesus and see that he shows us what healthy relationship can look like. He shows us what true acceptance can look like. And this is what he speaks over this woman in Luke 8. All right, moving on. Mark 10. I love this one. This one could have also been appropriate touch, but this is Jesus and the children. If you remember, in this story, I kind of like to think of the disciples as the bouncers. They're kind of standing around with their arms folded, and they're like, no, like the master doesn't have time for these kids, and Jesus says, no, let them come. Let them come. And Jesus does two things here. One, he attaches a high value by giving his time. And I want to point out, I truly feel that there's context to support this. This was unhurried time. Jesus wasn't trying to check a box or have a photo op so that it's like, look, Jesus is friendly to kids. You can put that on the next brochure. He was genuinely giving them unhurried time, undistracted attention. And it's also, the scripture actually says he gathered them in his arms. Again, there's that appropriate and meaningful touch. But Jesus places high value. And this is an obvious place where we get one of our, we think kids and youth are a big deal around here. We want to place high value there. We want to give time and attention and resources, not just because it's Jesus' example, but because we really think that. We really think that they're worth it, that the value is there, and we want to picture that value. All right, Luke 23. This is the crucifixion. Jesus has this interaction with the thief on the cross. And, we just have to know, the thief is not just there because he happened to be in the wrong place on a Tuesday, right? This is probably somebody who's done something to warrant him in that structure of society that he's hanging on the cross. It's a sinner's cross. It's a punishment situation. And he has this little back and forth with Jesus because he recognizes Jesus as the King of Kings. And Jesus says to him, today you'll be with me in paradise. That thief doesn't open his mouth to speak to Jesus expecting to be expected. He speaks to the other guy and says, don't you realize who this is? But you have to pick up from context in the back of his mind, even though he knows who Jesus is, he still thinks, like many of us do, if we're honest, but I can't be accepted because I know what I've done. And Jesus not only accepts him, but he pictures a hope-filled future, and he says, this very day, you'll be with me in paradise. What better hope-filled future than to be in that wretched state, this close to death, publicly embarrassed, hanging on a cross, thinking, I've got nothing left. This is what I deserve. And Jesus says, everything that I ever made that was good in my presence, you can come and enjoy that today. Now, he could have said, get down off the cross and go live a happy life. He didn't stop what was happening, but he accepted him and pictured a hope-filled future. And I just have to believe that thief did not have any expectation of the picture that he was about to step into prior to being hung on that cross. I just don't think he did. I think his expectation was this. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but his words indicate to me he had come to a place of accepting this is what I deserve. And isn't that what Jesus does with all of us? He actually steps in between us and what we deserve and says, I'm actually going to take care of that. And I'm going to give you, he switches places. He says, I'm going to give you the reward that I paid for. And Jesus says, I'm going to take the punishment that was meant for you. He steps into our place and takes what was rightfully ours and gives us a hope-filled future. It's not just a picture with Jesus, it's actually reality. All right, one more. Mark chapter 1. Peter, the disciple, this is where Peter's calling, right? And Jesus makes a genuine commitment to Peter. Now, some other things that go on in this story that I'll point out in a minute, but first of all, simply to say, again, many of these overlap. Jesus is valuing Peter by including him, saying, "Come, follow me. I will make you a fisher of men. I'll take something that you know and I'll make it better. I'll make it more meaningful. And I'll include you in what I'm doing. I'll bring you into my kingdom. I'll let you be an active participant." But anybody who's ever led anything or managed anything or, you know, it takes more time and resources and investment. It's a commitment to do that for somebody. I'll give you a real quick example. Some of you know, I have had multiple stints as an entrepreneur in my lifetime. And one of those was managing the ice cream shop in the hometown where I grew up. And at the peak of the summer, I managed a staff of about 25. Now they're mostly part-time, high school and college kids. But you just have to know, in a business like that, we're talking a 5-person shift operating in a 300 square foot building. This is like some of the old Dairy Queens where it's just a walk-up window. There's no big dining room, but we're talking high volume. 85 people standing in line on a Friday night. It's kind of got to be a well-oiled machine. Well, how many of you know that if I hired a new person and brought them onto the team, for a while, it caused me to have less time and do more work? It takes a commitment to train and bring somebody on to get them included and to help them be successful as part of the team. Like, it takes a commitment. Now, that is a very small way that I'm talking about. Jesus is coming to inaugurate the kingdom of God and totally change the way the whole place operates. And he says to Peter, "Come, I'm going to show you. I'm going to invest in you. I'm going to include you." And that comes with a significant, genuine commitment. Now, the other thing that happens with Peter, with the washing of the feet, Peter's like, "I don't know. I don't know. Like, I should wash your feet." And Jesus, again, as a leader, demonstrates, "No, I'm going to show you what it looks like. I'm going to accept you. I'm going to invest in you." But everything Jesus did, and this is I don't know if you call it an encouragement or an exhortation or what label you want to use, but like, this is for all of us. Everything Jesus did was to show the ones following him that they could do it too. And how? That's now, for some of us, it might be conviction. I don't always practice that real well. Maybe you don't either. That everything we do as a follower of Jesus, the words of hope that we speak to people, the way we serve them, the way we pray for them, it's not just to give them a hand up. It's to show them, hey, you can live this life too. You can do these things too. It's one of the things that I love about the way God interacts with us. Can always pass it on to the next person and show them how to do it. All right, let me begin to tie all of this together for us. In Jesus and what he accomplished through his death and resurrection, he made a way for God to enter our life space, for God to accept us and bring life-changing relationship. Now, most of us in this room have probably already made steps towards that reality, but I just think it's important to understand Jesus makes this possible, not only for you and I, but for everyone else. We're not in an exclusive club. It's an open door thing, okay? But in Jesus, God enters our life space. He accepts us, and there's no asterisk, there's no parentheses with that. He just accepts us and then brings life-changing relationship. You would think in the year of our Lord 2024 we would be past this. And I'll be honest, even I would never say it, but my behavior can show that sometimes I slip into it. We think that we have to fix ourselves and then God will accept us. And the reality is, God accepts us exactly where we're at because He knows, and He's trying to help us know, that life-changing relationship with Him is the only thing that can actually bring about the change that we desire. I am utterly and completely powerless to affect the change that I want to see in my own life. That's a sobering and humbling thought. And I've had to come to the realization that it's true. I can't do it. I can't make me be what I want me to be. I just can't. It's not in my power. But a relationship with Jesus can have the effect of totally changing my life and making me slowly and progressively become the person that He always created me to be. Now, I do want to go, and just for sake of clarity, I want to cover one more little caveat. Acceptance is not the same as approval. See, in our culture, we often are looking for approval. We want validation. We want people to pat us on the back and say, yes, Jesus says, I accept you. He doesn't say He always approves of our behavior. Now, you can take that in a whole nother direction too and become really legalistic and make everything about, again, you've got to check all the boxes and follow all the rules. No, Jesus accepts you with a blank check. Like, you are accepted, you are loved. Do you know why? Because He's the one that made you. He's not basing it on what you've done. He's basing it on what He knows you can be because He's the one that knit you together and wired you and made you in the first place. Do you know the story here in Matthew 16? There's just another interaction between Jesus and Peter where Jesus tells Peter, get behind me, Satan. Well, what Jesus is doing is He's accepting Peter while rejecting his behavior. Because Peter's behavior got out of alignment because he didn't continue accepting the picture Jesus had given him. Jesus was trying to include him and bring him in, and Peter gets out of line with that. And he tries to basically talk Jesus out of the plan that the Father has. Jesus, no, you can't go and die on the cross. You can't do those things. Far be it from us. But Jesus knows He has to be in continuity with the Father's will. He has to do the Father's business. And so we see Jesus accepting Peter. He doesn't lose his place at the table because he gets it wrong this time. But Jesus rejects his behavior while still accepting him. I don't know about you, but I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that in my own life. That Jesus's acceptance of me is not conditional. It's not wishy-washy. It's not here today and gone tomorrow. He has accepted me in this moment and will continue accepting me, but He wants to transform me. He wants to continue molding me and shaping me so that I can become all that He's made me to be. You see, God is an accepting God. That's just in His character. It's in His nature. It's who He is. And as He is accepting, He is bringing future life to the now. That's what this process of transformation is that Jesus sees you and I operating in a future creative potential that He's always designed us for, and He somehow, outside of the laws of physics, takes that reality and begins bringing it into the now and changing us and enabling us to be able to operate more and more in line with that reality that he's designed us for. You see, we, as a community of Jesus followers, we want to be the now future people of Jesus. Now, I don't know if that's grammatically correct or not, but we want to be people that live in the now, in the moment. We want to be fully present and authentic and honest and be who we are, but we also want to be the future people. We also want to be drawing on that future reality of the kingdom of heaven that Jesus is bringing into our lives, making us better, making us more real and more Jesus-y. We want to live in such a way that that reality oozes out of us. So that as we interact with people in the community, within the church community and the broader community, that we leak. That like as Jesus transforms us, as he changes us, as he continues to accept us, we become the kind of people that just ooze and leak love and acceptance. And I'm just, for sake of overstating it, that doesn't mean that we toss all morality out the door and say, everything's good. It doesn't matter what you do. There's no rules anymore. But we also don't go to the other end and become the rule keepers. We don't become the people of judgment. We become, just as we sang, Lord, have mercy on me. If the Lord has had mercy on me, then only response I have is to turn and give mercy to others. Have any of you seen, I don't know if it's on TikTok or Facebook Reels or one of those, but there's this couple, Dill, and I forget his wife's name, but they do this little thing where they're saying things to each other that like maybe they haven't been honest about, and they say, we listen and we don't judge. And then they, sort of spill the beans about something. And I just thought, maybe some of us need to practice some of that. We listen and we don't judge, because I'll be honest, that's a way of accepting. And it doesn't mean I approve of whatever the thing is, but I listen and I don't judge. I accept the person and I can move forward. And maybe by God's providence, as God changes me into the kind of person that can listen and not judge, some of that mercy will flow out of me. Maybe it will touch their life. Maybe they'll begin to ask questions. I've told 5 other people this story and I've got nothing but scowls and they don't return my calls anymore. But something's different about these people. What if we could be those kind of people? What if we could, as the weather warms up, meet some pedestrians out here on the street corner on our way, to the parking lot. And I've heard about those Vineyard people. They're a little different. Well, they could probably say that for a lot of reasons. But what if one of the reasons was, those are some people that those are not judgmental people. Those people, they get it. They're accepting people. They're merciful people. I don't know. Maybe that's something we can move towards as God leads us.